There was once a company so powerful that governments negotiated with it instead of controlling it. At its peak, its value would equal nearly $8 trillion, more than Apple and Microsoft combined. It wasn't a kingdom, it wasn't an empire, it was a corporation. It had its own army, its own navy, its own currency. It built forts, it signed treaties, it declared wars. And it held the power to decide who lived and who died. For almost 200 years, this company helped shape the modern world. Yet today, almost nobody remembers its name. This is the story of the Dutch East India Company, better known as the VOC. And surprisingly, this extraordinary empire began with something incredibly ordinary: spices. It all started in Europe, long before oil, before gold rushes, or global corporations. There was another obsession: flavor. For centuries, most European food was painfully bland. Salt preserved food, but spices transformed it. Pepper, cloves, cinnamon, nutmeg. These weren't just ingredients, they were symbols of wealth, power, and prestige. Serving exotic spices at your table was like driving a luxury car today. The richer you were, the more spices you could afford. Demand exploded, and somewhere, thousands of miles away, the tiny islands that produced these treasures were about to become the center of the world's attention. There was only one problem: Europe had no direct access to these priceless spices. Every shipment had to travel through the ancient trade routes controlled by Venice and the Ottoman Empire. They controlled the roads, the ports, and the prices. Every merchant, every kingdom, every buyer paid their share. By the time pepper, cloves, or nutmeg reached Europe, their prices had multiplied many times over. The spice trade had become one of the most profitable businesses on earth. But when prices become unbearable, history usually changes direction. Europe needed a new route. So Europe made a decision. If the land routes were controlled, they would find another way. For decades, explorers searched for a sea route to Asia. Then, Portugal succeeded. Sailing around the southern tip of Africa, Portuguese ships reached the Indian Ocean and sailed directly into the spice markets. Their ships returned home loaded with pepper, cloves, cinnamon, and unimaginable wealth. Overnight, Portugal became Europe's gateway to Asia. For a while, everyone else was forced to buy from them, especially the Dutch. But history had other plans. In 1580, Spain took control of Portugal, and Spain was already at war with the Dutch Republic. Suddenly, the Dutch lost access to the spice trade. No pepper, no cloves, no nutmeg. The gates had been closed. For years, Dutch merchants had depended on Portuguese ships. Now, they faced a choice: accept defeat or build their own route to Asia. It was an enormous gamble, but sometimes the greatest empires are born when there is no other choice. In 1595, a Dutch merchant named Cornelis de Houtman set sail for the East. His mission was simple: find the Spice Islands, cut out the middlemen, and bring the riches of Asia directly back to Amsterdam. There was only one problem. De Houtman had almost no reliable maps, no experience sailing these waters, and very little idea of what awaited him. The voyage became a nightmare. Disease spread across the ships. Scurvy killed dozens of sailors. Hunger, exhaustion, and despair followed them across the ocean. But after months, they finally reached Java. Reaching Java was only the beginning. De Houtman had found the Spice Islands, but he failed at almost everything else. His aggressive behavior damaged relationships with local rulers. Trade negotiations collapsed. Conflicts turned violent. By the time the expedition returned home, only 87 of the original 249 sailors were still alive. Financially, the voyage was disappointing. But strategically, it changed everything. The route was real. The Spice Islands could be reached. And suddenly, every merchant in Amsterdam wanted a share of the opportunity. The news spread across Amsterdam. The route to Asia was open. Within just a few years, dozens of Dutch trading companies rushed east, chasing the same fortune. But instead of defeating their competitors, they began defeating each other. They competed for ships, for sailors, for spices. Prices soared in Asia. Profits collapsed back home. It was chaos. Watching this, the Dutch government made a radical decision. In 1602, every major Dutch trading company was merged into one. A single corporation. One company with one mission: control the spice trade. That company was called the Dutch East India Company, the VOC. But the VOC was unlike any company the world had ever seen. It wasn't just allowed to trade. The Dutch government gave it extraordinary powers. It could build forts, raise armies, launch warships, sign treaties, print its own money, and wage war in the name of commerce. For the first time in history, a private company possessed powers that had once belonged only to kings. But creating an empire required something else: money. Lots of money. The VOC needed an enormous amount of capital. Building ships, hiring soldiers, constructing forts, and maintaining a global trading network cost a fortune. No single merchant could afford it. So, the Dutch came up with a revolutionary idea. Instead of asking one wealthy investor, they invited an entire nation. In 1602, ordinary people were given the chance to buy a small piece of the company. Merchants, bakers, craftsmen, widows, even servants. Thousands invested their savings. For the first time, ownership became something anyone could buy. The modern stock market had arrived. Investors wanted one thing: higher returns, bigger dividends, year after year. The VOC understood that there was only one way to keep profits growing: eliminate competition completely. Among all the spices, one stood above the rest: nutmeg. In the 17th century, people believed it could cure deadly diseases. Whether that was true didn't matter. What mattered was demand. A single pound of nutmeg could sell for more than its weight in gold. And almost the entire world supply came from one tiny group of islands: the Banda Islands. Whoever controlled Banda controlled the nutmeg trade. And the VOC intended to control everything. The people of the Banda Islands had traded with foreign merchants for generations. They sold to whoever offered the best price: Arabs, Chinese merchants, Portuguese traders, even the English. But the VOC wanted something very different. Not trade, control. They demanded exclusive rights to every harvest at prices they alone would decide. The Bandanese refused. Why sell to one buyer for less when others were willing to pay more? To the islanders, it was common sense. To the VOC, it was a threat. And soon, negotiation would give way to violence. In 1621, the VOC sent a new Governor General, Jan Pieterszoon Koen. He believed there could be no monopoly without absolute control. Diplomacy was over. Soldiers landed on the Banda Islands. Villages were burned. Food supplies were destroyed. Anyone suspected of resisting was captured or executed. The island's leaders were publicly beheaded as a warning to everyone else. Before the invasion, around 15,000 people lived on the Banda Islands. Within months, only a small fraction remained. The survivors were displaced, enslaved, or forced into labor. The monopoly had finally been secured. But its true cost could never be measured in money. By the mid-17th century, the VOC stood at the center of global trade. Its fleet crossed oceans. Its warehouses overflowed with spices, tea, silk, and enormous wealth. Investors celebrated record dividends. From the outside, the company looked unstoppable. But beneath the profits, cracks were beginning to appear. Corruption spread through the organization. Officials enriched themselves. Costs continued to rise. Wars became more expensive. Competition grew stronger. And the monopoly that had built the empire slowly began to disappear. The greatest threat was no longer outside the company. It was inside. By the end of the 18th century, the empire was collapsing. Years of corruption, endless wars, mounting debt, and the loss of its monopoly had finally caught up with the VOC. In 1799, the world's first global corporation officially went bankrupt. But the story didn't end there. The Dutch state inherited its territories, its infrastructure, and many of its methods. The company disappeared. The system did not. Today, corporations still influence governments. Global trade still shapes the fate of nations. Financial markets still reward growth above almost everything else. The VOC may be gone, but the world it helped create is still the world we live in. And perhaps the most important question isn't how the VOC built an empire, but how much of that empire still exists today.